So you're now tuned into the Real Rap Radio Show. I'm your host, Walil Archer on Delta Hot Radio. I have my special guest, H Munoz. How are you today?
Fine, Will. How are you? I'm great.
I'm doing awesome, and thank you for joining me today.
You're welcome.
So let's talk about your book. Let the listeners know the title of your book.
Okay. The title of my book is Challenges, Triumphs, and Heroes, and it's subtitled My Odyssey Through Celanese. And what it's really about is my 33-year career with this corporate giant and everything that I encountered, from personal challenges to witnessing very interesting personalities, sometimes in a good way, sometimes in not so good a way. But it's about leadership. It's about leadership under some tight circumstances. Anyway,
Now, how did you come up with that title?
well, as I mentioned, uh, it seems that from the very beginning, as a young boy in a border town, Brownsville, Texas, I was facing challenges. My dad was a visionary. Didn't make a lot of money. He was a clerk at a tobacco store in Brownsville, but he believed in education and he wanted his kids to have education. He put me in a private school, paid the tuition up until the fifth or sixth grade, and then he said, "Can't do it anymore, son. If you want to continue, you're going to have to work. You're going to have to work it out yourself. Otherwise, you go to public school." Not that he was an elitist, but he was putting it on me to figure out how to work that. Well, he got me a job, after school job, and I talked to the brothers who ran the school, and they gave me a job sweeping the classrooms after class. And that's the way I made it through 12th grade, St. Joseph's Academy, Brownsville, Texas. Went on to University of Texas in Austin. That's the start. That was the first challenge.
Now,
Triumphs, I considered that a triumph, but I didn't do it without help. And that's the key thing, because those who helped me were the heroes, the real heroes in my story and in the story of Celanese, which is a very interesting story. That's how I came up with it.
okay, nice. Now, what would you like the readers to take away from reading the book?
Well, as I mentioned, I think when you distill it down, challenges ranged from moving, having to sacrifice family for career. I try to balance that. Didn't do a great job sometimes. In the end, today, I've got four kids, eight grandkids. I'm living in beautiful Florida, so you might say that I made it. But there's different ways to measure success. And in those ways, it was a challenge, and I needed a lot of help. I did make it to the top. I was president of the biggest, fastest growing division of my company. But I was leaving a lot of friends behind all the time. I moved every 3 years almost. I lived in Mexico City for 3 years. I lived in Germany twice with my family. I traveled all over the place, stationed in Chicago, Dallas, Corpus Christi, New Jersey. And in those terms, the leadership required for each location was different and it needed different solutions. So if the reader wants to learn about how to lead in different circumstances, being a Mexican American, for example, in an all Anglo world back in the 60s and 70s, um, I had to maneuver quite a bit, but I did it.
Now, how was it moving every 2, 3 years, making friends and then leaving your friends?
That's the tough thing. But it started with me going to work for Celanese in Bishop, Texas, rural, countryside, small, very close-knit type of community. And I was settling down, and who knows, I may have wound up there like a lot of other of my colleagues working there from, till retirement. But something happened. I had cultivated a very good friend at the plant that I worked in. Steve was his name. I won't mention his last name. Um, but he and I became good buddies. Every time that I hit a snag with facing, racism, he stood up for me. He helped me through it. So we were pretty close. One day, we as we normally did, uh, traded who drove who to work. It was his turn to drive, so he was driving his Volkswagen and me to the job. We had to cross a heavy traffic highway. Somehow we had been talking. It was September. We had been talking about our job. We stopped at the stop sign. I saw traffic was heavy. I laid back. I said, "Well, it's going to be a few minutes before we find a gap." But just as I formed those thoughts, the car started moving across the highway. And I said, "Why is Steve, is he trying to get a?" And I never finished the thought. The next thing I know, the next thing I feel is peace and birds singing, chirping. And I open my eyes and I'm laying on the pavement on the highway. And what I see is Steve's shoes, his feet, kind of to the side of me. I black out again. I come to and I'm in the ambulance. When I come to, every bone in my body is screaming pain. But I hear the guy riding the ambulance on the radio, and he says, "I've got one coming to the hospital. The other one needs the coroner." My friend had been killed in that accident. That changed me. A couple of weeks later, I went, well, not a couple of weeks. I had to heal for several weeks. When I finally made it back to work, walked into my boss's office and said, "Find me a job somewhere else. Make it a promotion, but get me out of here." I had to do that. So he sent me to Germany as a lone American representative
Mm.
of the joint venture we had with the Germans. I had to work in German, the German language. I learned it, or I thought I was learning it. But I remember 3 months into the job, I was sitting in One of the meetings conducted in German. I could understand just about everything, but I couldn't express myself. And I just closed my eyes and said to myself, what the hell am I doing here? Well, determination and help put me over the edge. And about a month later, I was dreaming in German and I was speaking German fluently. So that's the kind of challenges and successes that I talk about in my book.
Now, how long would you say it took you to write the book from start to finish?
3 years, the first year and a half, kind of doing it, just when I felt like it. The last year and a half, 100% dedication. Takes a lot of, I tell you what, having written this book, I've come away with a lot more respect and admiration for authors, for people that write books. It takes a lot. You can be inspired, but it's a long way from inspiration to putting it black and white on the page.
So true. So true. Did you experience writer's block when writing this book? And if so, how did you overcome it?
Well, um, I would say yes. Maybe my writer's block was a little different than most. It wasn't that I was like, gee, what do I say next? I had a lot of stories, a lot of, and not only from memory, but from gobs of files that I had. For example, I kept daily calendars that noted every meeting that I ever had, with who and how long and so forth, and the subject, the agenda. I had always had the the habit of keeping a diary. It wasn't every day, but consistently I would write down my thoughts and feelings. So that helped. So it wasn't the material, it was the organization. Where do you start? How do you link one with the other? Uh, the timeline isn't always the best organizational arrow to follow. Sometimes it's the subject matter. For example, I mentioned racism. Um, how do you do that? Well, you don't want to cast the whole thing in a negative way, but you recognize that with the racism, there are people that are not racist. There are people that are racist but fair-minded, and there are people that are racist just because who knows why. So you have to differentiate, and you have to let the reader know. Look, this you have friends that are great, nice to you, but you see that they're racist. How do you deal with that? That's the kind of thing that has to be taken in a special way. And I think I managed to do it in the book. And I think that those that'll read the book will understand. Okay, there's it's a complicated subject that merits time, effort, and a lot of introspection. There's other themes. Uh, I mentioned help. You get to a point where you need some help, and a lot of people, especially the minorities, they don't feel comfortable just asking for help. They feel that's maybe a sign that they're weak or not smart enough or whatever. You can't let that. hinder you. You've got to bite the bullet and say, hey, buddy, I need some help. Can you help me? Now, having said that, once you achieve certain levels of success, you become not the helpee, but the helper. And you need to be aware of that person over there or this person that is in the same boat maybe you were in, and you have to offer the help that they need. That's one of the other themes that I follow. Anyway, I think it'll be interesting for especially young people who are caught in a what do I do now? Am I doing the right thing? Am I following the right career? Well, the book will guide you through that. One of the things that I mentioned in doing that is it doesn't matter what you're doing. What matters is whether you have passion for it, whether you love to do it. If you have those things, you're doing the right thing. Keep at it. If you don't, you better find what the right thing is because it won't bring you satisfaction otherwise.
So true. How many chapters would you say your book have?
Well, I've got it right here. The book is not that long. It's roughly 250 pages. Uh, but it has, oh, maybe 20 chapters.
Okay. And out of the 20 chapters, which one would you say is your most memorable chapter?
I would say the chapter the first time I was in Germany, the first German assignment was was the most interesting part of my career. I was, as I had mentioned,
Excuse me.
my company Celanese had a joint venture with a German company by the name of Hearst. Well, the German industry, this is in the 80s, was not that far removed from the time that they were making poison gas for the concentration camps. You know, it's that kind of background that they had. So the staff that I had under me and with me, to a man, had been veterans of the war on the German side. Some of them because they were drafted, some of them because they were Nazis. So that made it for an interesting mix. Believe me, I wasn't the single leader or boss of that organization. There were three people. I had the technical part. There was a production guy and a financial guy. And the three of us together were the management. Of the three, the lead person was not me. I was the American. The lead person was the production guy, and he was an ex-Nazi, Dr. Barr. When he met me at the airport, we sat down. He was very cordial, very civilized. Herr Munoz, he said, welcome to Germany. But I thought your company was going to send an American. I looked at him and I said, Dr. Barr, I am an American. You may not know a lot about America, and I don't know much about Germany, but let's teach each other. Well, we had a tough time teaching each other. We saw things totally different. What was important to him wasn't important to me. He was important. He looked at the minutiae I looked at the big picture. We we were always clashing. It came to a head one Friday. It had been a tough week. He always tried to be the last guy out of the office to show that he was head boss. That Friday evening, it was about 7 o'clock already. Everybody had started to leave at 5, but 5:30, everybody was gone. So it was close to 7, dinner time. I was walking out. I saw he was still there. He was on the phone. He slammed the phone down. So I stopped and said, Dr. Barr, is everything okay? He said, No, no, it's not, Herr Munoz. I said, What's the problem? He says, I can't get a taxi. I, I can't drive to work. I have to use the taxi because of my back. And the doctor told me, don't drive. So, well, listen, I'll give you a ride home. No, 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 no. I said, look, it's not, we don't live that far apart. I'll give you a ride home. He said, well, okay. After all, it's your fault. I said, what? Your back is my fault? Yes. The doctor told me that the back problem is due to stress, and you are the biggest reason for stress in my life. I said, oh, sorry about that, but come on. So took him took him home. When we got there, he's he hadn't said a word. He said, "Come in for a drink." I said, "Sure." We shared a scotch, and after that moment, we uh, we started to work together pretty good. Years later, this is you'll find this interesting. 20, 25 years later, he had retired, and I had climbed the ladder, corporate ladder. So I was head, as I mentioned, of the largest division of the company. And we were giving a shareholders meeting, and I had given my part all in German and in Frankfurt. And we finished the presentations. We came down from the stage, mixing with the audience. The audience was mainly retirees. So as I'm chatting with some people, I hear, Herr Munoz, somebody shouting at me. I look over and I said, that looks like an older Dr. Barr. And it was. He was walking towards me, kind of rushing towards me. And he had somebody at his elbow that he was pulling along. And when I recognized him and said, hey, Dr. Barr, he turned over to his friend and he said, you see, I told you that I knew him personally. That was, after all we had been through, after all he had put me through, that was a moment.
Thanks for sharing. As we begin to close out, where can they find your book at online for purchase? And any closing thoughts or closing remarks?
Well, the easiest way to find my book is on Amazon. Whether you do the e-version, Kindle or paperback or hardback, Amazon is the best place to do it. Um, the publisher that I'm using now is Atticus, atticus.com. You can find that there as well. And my website. My website is edsbluedot.com.
Okay, Ed, I'd like to thank you for doing the interview today.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
So that's my time today on the Real Rap Radio Show. I'll see you guys next time on the Real Rap Radio Show with your host, Walil Archer on Down to Hot Radio. Peace and blessings, everyone.
Thank you.